Okay, so I want to discuss in this video a subject that is known in the UK as no platforming. Now, I don't know if this applies in other countries or not, so I'm going to keep this restricted to the UK context. But basically, no platforming is a position taken by the National Union of Students in universities across the country of saying that particular individuals or organisations can't have a voice on the grounds that they incite hate speech, or they're disreputable individuals or organisations, and that university should be an environment where everyone feels safe. The understanding being that if a certain individuals speak, they are threatening the perceived safety of certain students in the university. Now, I don't know when this platform began. I don't know when this began as a policy, but it has grown increasingly controversial because whilst in recent years, or whilst initially it was used to counter certain pretty disreputable organisations, to name some: Al Mujahideen, the British National Party, the English Defence League, Hizb ut-Tahrir, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, and National Action. National Action, I don't know much about that, but all of those organisations have disreputable reputations. Hizb ut-Tahrir, I'm pretty familiar with in the university context because I'm reading a book, The Islamist by Ed Hussein. Hizb ut-Tahrir, by all accounts, is a pretty vile organisation. Um, the British National Party, of course, is a far-right political party, which is now defunct because they no longer have the finances necessary to maintain political party status. But basically, I would have no major contention with all of those organisations being seen for what they are, disreputable organisations. In the case of some of the Islamist groups, they have a pretty um, obvious track record of anti-Semitism, homophobia, and negative attitudes to women and segregation and so on. But there has been increasing focus on this policy of no platforming recently because of its increasing intolerance. And there is a very strong claim that whilst it started off with understandable objectives, i.e., not to allow organisations that would be stirring up hatred and violence against minority student groups, it has now become guilty of what it has set out to oppose. And it has become a deeply, deeply intolerant approach. Certain universities, I believe Durham, Newcastle, Leicester, and Salford, have put forward motions to overturn no platforming. What one aspect of no platforming that has been significant is that it's very much the domain of the political left, and yet some of the targets are left wing figures. One example being Peter Tatchell, um, who's a well known gay rights, human rights campaigner. He's been no platformed for, I believe, in his case, it was perceived Islamophobia. Um, and that is, by the way, an aspect of the NUS and contemporary student unions that is incredible. Um, that the perception of Islamophobia is such that they're actually see that as an overriding issue to what traditionally would have been left wing domain, i.e., women's rights and gay rights. But even the LGBT lobby is now turning in on itself and claiming that white gay men are no longer a minority, so they no longer can have a voice within the LGBT community within the NUS. So it's getting to the point where the left is turning in on itself. Now, why am I bothered about this? I'm not a student, so you might ask why are you bothered? Well, I have two feelings with this. First of all, I'm very grateful that I'm no longer involved in student politics. I was involved briefly when I was at the University of Wolverhampton 10 years ago. I don't miss that for a second. I don't miss it for a second now. The sort of environment that was around then, I would say, wasn't as bad as it is today. Um, I think it's got a lot more intolerant, and but even with that in mind, I do recall that There was very much a left wing liberal elite at my university, and frankly, I would say most universities that dictate what should and shouldn't be said. So, whilst universities should be a bastion of free expression, they've become the exact opposite. This to me is deeply concerning. I'm going to read out an article and I would ask you to bear with me. It's a little bit lengthy, but I do want to read this out to try and demonstrate the sort of issues that I'm talking about. And this is the title of the article. It's from the London Times, and the title is Campaign to Change Imperial to Gaia College. This is a college, I believe, at Cambridge University. Bear with me, and I'll voice some of my reflections on this afterwards. I'll try and not make this too long, but I do need to read it out so that you can understand the context. Students have called for Imperial College and King's College to be renamed as part of an attempt to decolonise and demisogynize higher education. Members of the University of London, my apologies, University of London, student union said the names of the universities were symptomatic of the historical and structural racism and sexism that cause daily microaggressions to students of colour and those who self-identify as female, and they should instead be called Gaia College and Citizens College. Frederick Chetwynd Talbot, president of the King's College Indigenous Peoples Society, argued the current names were inimical to a place of learning that claims to offer a safe space for all. He added this is about the intersectional oppression suffered each and every day by people from the global south and members of the LGBTQ, don't know what the Q stands for, community. He has tabled a motion to petition for an immediate overhaul, naming Imperial after Gaia, the mythical earth goddess, and changing King's to Citizens College would represent a powerful mobilization against institutional white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. The empire was a tool of genocide and subjugation, and it is completely inappropriate to recognize it in a university in the 21st century, said Mr. Chetwynd Talbot, who is studying for a degree in the history of art. He argued that while he did not know which king was behind King's College, I believe it was King Henry VI, it is pretty certain he was a cisgender white man who oppressed someone. Imperial College was founded as the Imperial Institute to mark Queen Victoria's Gold Jubilee. King's was created by King George IV, my apologies, I'm figured of King's College, Cambridge, and the Duke of Wellington in 1829. The vote will be tonight in the University of London Union's Saif Gaddafi room, built from a bequest by the Libyan leader's son. The motion has already been seconded by Imperial College's microaggressions officer. My God. I'm sorry, but fucking hell. Who holds a sabbatical position. An Imperial spokeswoman said the university management wasn't against the motion in principle. Let's make a deal, she said. We promise to do this if Manchester University changes its name to Personchester. Trinity College, Cambridge replaces its statue of wife murderer Henry VIII with domestic violence campaigner, and Bristol University donates all its endowment to Liberia as penance for slavery. Mr. Chetwynd Talbot said the moves would be smart, but had other suggestions. I'm not terribly happy about Jesus College, Oxford either, and don't even get me started on the School of Oriental and African Studies, he said. Okay, okay. I'm going to voice some very candid reflections here, and I'm going to just say it. I think this guy, Frederick Chetwynd Talbot, sounds like a complete extremist. Um, I have to say the response from Imperial spokeswoman is quite amusing. She's clearly being tongue in cheek there and very sarcastic. Frankly, this idiot needs some sarcasm. This is someone who quite clearly is a professional person who wants to be professionally offended. I mean, my goodness, microaggressions officer? Are you fucking kidding me? This to me demonstrates just how petty the NUS has become, and they're basically living in a bubble outside the real world. And what bothers me especially about um, for example, the African Studies Department in many universities, is they will constantly denounce the evils of the British Empire. Now, this is the thing, right? I have no problem whatsoever with a tertiary education institution being honest about the problems of the British Empire, including its many crimes. I'm not a blind nationalist, and I'm well aware that the British Empire done some things that can never ever be condoned or justified. But what I do have a problem with is the utter rank hypocrisy. I guarantee you, this guy, Frederick Chetwynd Talbot, wouldn't have a word to say about Robert Mugabe, or Idi Amin, or Muammar Gaddafi. Why? Because all three leaders were anti-British. Therefore, they must be heroes. Doesn't matter that in the case of Mugabe especially, he has turned Zimbabwe from being the breadbasket of Africa to being a failed state with the world's highest inflation. I mean, these are people who are so petty-minded, so narrow in their thinking, and so obnoxious in the way that they frame terminology and frame language that it is. I really do think they're living in a little bubble of their own, and I think the correct way to deal with them is precisely what the Imperial spokeswoman said, by pointing out the absurdity of their arguments. Now he's saying that whoever founded King's College must have been a cisgender, oppressive white man. Well, basically what this idiot wants to do, and it is an idiotic position, is rewrite British history. It's actually whitewashing of history. And contrary to being honest about the crimes of the British Empire, what it's actually doing is whitewashing the British Empire. Now, this is blatantly absurd. If someone like this really had his way, I wouldn't be half surprised. The fact is, his response to this, he couldn't even see it was tongue in cheek. He said the moves would be smart. So he doesn't even see that she is clearly being sarcastic there. Frankly, I wouldn't have a lot of patience with someone like this. Um, and these are the people who are running the NUS. They're absolutely dominant in the British university system right now. People motivated by their hatred of this country. And it's frankly sickens me, to be quite honest. You know, someone like him, he is taking all the benefits, all the advantages of being in a university in the United Kingdom and using it to peddle his hatred and his anti British agenda. It sickens me. Now, if it was a case of being objective and saying, yes, let's talk about the crimes of the British Empire, I'd have no issue with that. But to actually try to rewrite history, to actually try to demonize this country to the extent that he is doing, in the incredibly petty way that he is doing it, frankly, I think my thoughts are he should go and fuck himself. What a pathetic, petty minded little man this guy obviously is. I mean, it gets to the point where, and it does relate to this no platforming thing because to me it's demonstrative of just how petty minded and how narrow minded universities have become. There was a prominent recent example, the writer Julie Bindel was no platformed because of her views on transgender women. Now, what's interesting is I forget the name now because I can't read articles as I have this camera open, but the article from I believe the Guardian, in fact, even the Guardian newspaper, which is a very left wing newspaper, and you would think that they would be very much in favour of it. Even they have been gradually condemning this policy because it's too far left even for them. Um, the writer of the article said that they contacted a feminist or a self-declared feminist, I believe her name is Ross Kavanagh, who led the campaign to no platform Julie Bindel because of her views on transgender women. The irony is Rose Kavanagh uh, is part of a group called Feminists Against Censorship. Now the double standards of that is incredible. So she's purporting to be from a group that describes itself as Feminists Against Censorship, and yet she is wanting to censor another woman simply for having a different point of view. It's getting to the point where there's a very small, very narrow-minded group of far-left neoliberal students who basically want to dictate the way things should be. This is deeply intolerant, and it is very, very opposite of what university should be about. University should be a bastion of knowledge, it should be a bastion of debate, and what these pathetic individuals are doing is turning it into a bastion of basically policing people's minds. And frankly, it sickens me. And I think it is a total disgrace. And I think the NUS needs to get a backbone and deal with the situation. If people cannot freely express their views in university, where can they do it? University is supposed to propel young men and women for society. Or maybe I'm being sexist by using the term young men and women. I'm sorry I forgot to say pangender. But seriously, what this has become is a total epicenter of this cancer called political correctness. And it really sickens me to the core. I mean, these are people who are not living in the real world. And a lot of the so called representatives of African societies and Oriental studies and so on, they're from privileged backgrounds. They're not really experiencing what the real daily life of some kid in a Lusaka or a Nairobi slum is experiencing. I mean, the very fact that they're studying in the UK is testament to this. So instead of gaining knowledge and using that knowledge to, say, bring it back and tackle the corruption of a country like Zimbabwe under Mugabe, all they want to do is demonize the country that they're studying in. Now, as I've said several times in this video, I have no problem with people having an honest and forthright debate about the wrongs of the British Empire. But what I have a problem with is demonizing the country that you are studying in. As far as I'm concerned, they should get the hell out and go to university in Harare or Lusaka if they're really practicing what they preach. But they're hypocrites. They're demonizing this country whilst they're taking full advantage of the education opportunities that we're offering. And I think it frankly is abhorrent that they want to basically whitewash the UK. Um, Basically to the point where these are people who are professionally offended. And, I can understand the argument about creating safe zones where there is a real legitimate threat of violence. And certainly groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, there was that threat. But it is now becoming a situation where there's a very, very small number of people dictating the way it should be for everybody else. If this is not a 1984 Orwellian society, I don't know what is. I find it very troubling. And what it basically indicates to me is that the NUS is run by a bunch of spineless, massively politically correct, oversensitive buffoons. Very obnoxious and unpleasant people who basically have this notion they have a moral high ground above everybody else. The rest of us are just ignorant cavemen. I think they're so deeply involved in their own little bubble and their own incredibly narrow thinking. These are people who have no concept of the real world. And what troubles me about it is student life is hard enough as it is. You have young men and women who are trying to find their way in life. They're trying to discover themselves. They're trying to discover their thinking. They're developing their social lives. They've just come out of adolescence. They're young adults and they're trying to develop their lives. And they're suddenly put into this environment where their entire thinking is controlled. This is extremely dangerous. And frankly, it is something that Adolf Hitler and Mao Zedong and Joseph Stalin would be proud of. It is completely shackling. And this argument about creating safe zones is being used as a cover for outright censorship. That's what it is. If you're so insecure with your arguments that you cannot hear a different opinion, well, there's two solutions to that. No one is forcing you to go to those lectures. So if there is a controversial speaker coming, simple. Don't go and listen to them speak. Just get on with your coursework, mind your own business. If you must, organize a protest, make it peaceful. Although I think that would be a statement of intolerance. Um, I just find it very disturbing what is happening in British universities right now. And to be clear here, I'm not denouncing everybody in the NUS. I'm sure there's level-headed people in the organisation that would agree with everything I'm saying. But the intolerant, and it has to be said, this is predominantly left-wing faction, is just demonstrating how deeply intolerant they really are. This is a police state mentality that they have. It is basically thought control. And to me, it's deeply disturbing. If there are people advocating hate speech, the onus should be on the NUS to define exactly what that is and point out exactly where the people are actually making violent threats against anyone. Because as far as I'm concerned, if there is no violent threats, then freedom of expression should be absolute. If you have organizations, whether they be Islamists or far right or whatever, that are expressing violence against others, then then yeah, they shouldn't be allowed a platform because there's a blatant and clear threat of violence. But what I find incredible is the utter hypocrisy of the NUS. There's certain types of intolerance that is completely fine. Take, for example, Bahar Mustafa. She was the so-called equalities officer of Goldsmiths College in London. Now, eventually, after a lot of public pressure, she was disciplined, but she came out with outright hateful and violent memos and letters against white men, white people in general, but especially against white men. Now, if this had been a white, straight male coming up with this stuff, not only would he have been totally denounced, he probably would have been kicked out of the university and facing criminal charges. Because she was an ethnic minority woman, she took the arrogant view that she can get away with it. Now, as far as I'm concerned, this platform, this no platforming environment, has created horrible, obnoxious individuals like Bahar Mustafa. There's a lot more Bahar Mustafas out there. I'm only using her as an example because she got away with it for quite a long time. She was reprimanded eventually, but it took a hell of a long time. You know, it should have happened immediately. That should have been completely denounced at the time. But she got away with it, frankly, because she was an ethnic minority woman. Disgraceful. This is basically becoming a situation where there is it's basically a bastion of total intolerance. And it's basically a case of what we say is correct, what you say is wrong, therefore we will silence you. As for the all these campaigns to take down statues, rename campuses and so on, it's nothing but whitewashing of history. You know, you could have a critical assessment of King George IV, and I'd have no problem with that. But to rename a college and to take down a statue of him and to rename a college as Gaia College. This is nothing but historic whitewashing because it's trying to reprogram the initial thinking behind what the university was. And these people are extremists. They will not be happy at stopping there. Believe me, if they had their way, they would be renaming towns and cities in the UK. You know, her response, the fact that this guy actually responded to her response by saying some of these are okay ideas, or let's see, the moves would be smart. The moves would be smart. So he couldn't even tell she was being sarcastic. Person Chester. Think of how absurd that is. And I'm not saying that's something that they have proposed, but it is a response that she made. And he didn't even try to deny that is their thinking. So, frankly, like I say, I have two responses to this. Number one, gratitude that I'm no longer involved in that sort of university life. And number two, deep sympathy for the majority of students who have to put up with this shit and put up with these deeply intolerant, obnoxious, far left, far liberal individuals because they are demonstrating extreme intolerance. And this notion of creating safe zones, as far as I'm concerned, it's an excuse. And it can be used for anything. And like I say, the left is turning against itself when they're actually saying to gay men, gay white men, oh, you're no longer a minority, so you're no longer going to be allowed to come to LGBT events. I mean, another problem I have is with the restructuring of language so that it only fits into a certain agenda. I think that's disgusting. And it takes away the very nature of what university should be about, which is free expression and having debate. I mean, it's going to be a matter of time where there's actually no debate. So I'm going to round it up there. Feel free to let me know your thoughts. If you are someone who advocates no platforming, we're not going to be in agreement, and you can have your points here, but unlike you, I'm going to allow you to have an opinion. Um, I just hope that at some point the NUS gets some backbone and starts realizing that university has to be an environment where people feel comfortable in expressing their own views. And of course, there should be action taken against extreme views. But what we're getting to a point is we're getting to the point where it is complete mind control. That sounds like an exaggeration, it sounds absurd, but that is basically what is happening. And that's not the real world. In the real world, you hear politically correct incorrect opinions all the time. So this is just molding students into overly sensitive, very weak-minded people. And they think they're being smart, they think that it's intelligence. It's not. It demonstrates the opposite of intelligence. It demonstrates an incredible pettiness. And what bothers me is the people they claim to be acting in defense of, i.e., those struggling in the developed world, have a life that is unimaginably different from what these very privileged, very obnoxious far left students experience. I mean, to study in Oxford or Cambridge, you need to be from a pretty well off background. And what are they doing? Instead of using it to improve the situation in their own countries, all they're doing is denouncing and demonizing the British Empire. I've news for you. Demonizing the British Empire, vilifying the British Empire, is not going to improve a damn thing in developing countries. What will improve the situation in those countries is improved governance, taking on corruption, conflict resolution. Those are all factors that are going to improve the situation. But constantly talking about removing a statue of an early 19th century king, do you really think that taking down a statue of King George IV is going to improve a damn thing for a child in a slum in Nairobi? Think of how stupid that is. That's what bothers me about it. They think they're doing something benevolent. They think it's progressive. It doesn't do a damn thing. And it's totally selfish. They're not really acting on behalf of those in developed countries. They're only acting on behalf of their own incredibly narrow agenda. And what's happening here is they're actually tolerating intolerance. You know, if I can guarantee you, if there was to be a debate on the blasphemy laws in Pakistan and the persecution of minorities in Pakistan, it wouldn't go ahead because the NUS would rule that it's Islamophobic. That's how fucking stupid their position has become. And I have no regrets for my strong language there because I have very strong views on this. They're basically tolerating intolerance, and I just know if I was in a student body right now, I'd go crazy. So I really, really sympathise with the majority of students who have to put up with this nonsense. University should be a place where people develop confidence, not become super sensitive beings. It's pathetic. So I really, really hope the NUS gets a grip and starts dealing with the real world rather than the very, very, very petty agenda that we're seeing right now.